Judgement on the Nile.
7 passengers board the luxury yacht Osiris. By the time it docks in Edfu, only the guilty will remain. Chapter 1. The Golden Cage. The air in Judge Sterling's chambers always felt thinner than everywhere else. It smelled of beeswax, expensive scotch, and the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that only power can generate. I held my breath, afraid to make a sudden noise, afraid to disturb the big man, and perhaps more so, afraid of the sudden burst of cold anger that could destroy my budding career. I placed the bone china cup on the coaster, aligning the handle perfectly at the 4 o'clock position. "Your coffee, Judge," I said. My voice was tight. It had been tight for weeks. Since I started as his secretary, my first job out of university, I had really started to see what power was. As the chief judge of this district, his word was law. One step out of place, and your career was over. Judge William Sterling didn't look at the coffee. He was leaning back in his chair, his jacket discarded, tie loosened just enough to suggest the end of a long day. He was a handsome man in a predatory way. In his late 50s, he possessed an impressive career and an equally impressive physique. He oozed charisma, with silver hair, broad shoulders, and eyes that were a piercing, watery blue. Those eyes could see through any thought one tried to hide. I lowered my gaze, focusing instead on steadying my hands. He wasn't reading the dossier in front of him. He was watching me. "You're wearing the blue dress," he observed. His voice was a low rumble, his lips tilted at an angle, amused, as if he were playing. A cat toying with a mouse. I stiffened, my hand hovering over the tray. "You said we had clients coming in earlier, sir. You asked me to look professional." "I did." He took off his reading glasses, chewing slowly on the arm. "It suits you, Taylor. Brings out the intelligence in your eyes." I forced a smile, taking a half step back. "Thank you, sir. Is there anything else?" "Don't rush off." He gestured to the leather chair opposite him. "Sit." It wasn't a request. I sat on the very edge of the cushion, my knees pressed together, my hands clasping my notebook like a shield. I had been working for him for 4 months. At first, it was strictly professional, but in the last few weeks, the boundaries had started to blur. I could feel the lingering glances, the late-night dictation sessions that felt unnecessary, and the compliments that landed just south of appropriate. "You've been working yourself to the bone," Sterling said softly. "I see the timestamps on your emails. Midnight, 1 in the morning. You're young, Taylor. You should be enjoying your life, not drowning in my paperwork." "I want to do a good job, Judge. This position is everything to me." "Ambition." He smiled, and it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I like that. But ambition needs fuel. It needs inspiration." He stood up and walked around the heavy oak desk. I fought the urge to stand up too. He stopped right beside my chair, leaning against the edge of his desk, towering over me. I could smell his cologne, sandalwood and musk. "I have a proposition for you," he said, his warm breath brushing against my neck. My heart hammered against my ribs. Goosebumps rose on my skin. "Please don't," I thought. "Please don't ask me for dinner. Please don't put your hand on my shoulder." He placed his hand on my shoulder, a heavy, dead weight. "I'm going away in 3 weeks," he said. "A trip to Egypt, a private charter down the Nile. Just myself, my wife Martha, and a few old friends. Arthur Penhaligon, Marcus Thorne, the old guard." I blinked, confused. "You want me to manage the itinerary from here? I can call the travel agent right now." "No." He chuckled darkly. "I don't need a travel agent, Taylor. I need an ally." He leaned down, his face inches from mine. "Martha. Well, Martha can be difficult. She gets anxious on these trips, and my friends can be a handful. I need someone there who is sensible, someone discreet, someone I can trust to handle the details so I can actually relax. He reached out and, with one finger, brushed a stray lock of hair away from my temple. I froze. I want you to come with us, he whispered. All expenses paid. A private cabin on the Osiris. You'll be working nominally, just keeping the schedule, managing the luggage, and... He paused and slid his hand down my shoulder before sliding it back up to rest on my collarbone. He continued, but mostly, I want you there to ensure my comfort. Sir, I stammered, my mind racing. Mrs. Sterling, surely she wouldn't... Martha does what she's told, he said, his voice hardening for a split second before returning to that smooth veneer. And she knows I need my staff. It's a remarkable opportunity, Taylor. The pyramids, the Valley of the Kings, champagne on the deck at sunset. It's a world you've only read about. I want to show it to you. He let the silence hang there, heavy and suggestive. This was a trap. I knew it was a trap. He was offering me a 5-star holiday, but the price tag was hanging in the air, unspoken. If I said no, I'd be fired within the month. Incompatible work ethic, he'd say. If I said yes. I looked at his face. He looked smug, confident. He thought he had me cornered. But I also thought of my student loans. I thought of the terrifyingly empty job market. And I thought, I can handle him. I can dodge him. I just need to be smart. It would be an honor, Judge, I said, keeping my voice steady. Good girl. He patted my shoulder, his hand lingering for a second too long before he pushed himself off the desk. Go home, Taylor. Buy yourself something nice for the desert heat. Put it on my credit card. I stood up, trembling slightly, and made my way to the door. Oh, and Taylor? I turned back. He was back in his chair, bathed in shadow, the blinds slicing the light across his face like prison bars. What happens on the river, he said, stays on the river. Understood? Understood, sir. I closed the heavy door behind me and leaned against the wood, exhaling a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My skin crawled where he had touched my hair. I walked to the elevator, my heels clicking on the marble floor. I pressed the button for the lobby. My body shook as I held onto the folders tightly, my expression neutral as if nothing was wrong, as if my heart wasn't pounding, as if everything was perfectly fine. When the door opened, I smiled at the colleagues walking out and stepped into the empty lift, pressing the button for my level. I held my breath. As soon as the lift door opened, I rushed to the toilet and hid in a stall. The bile that had built up in my stomach poured into the basin. How does she do it? I asked myself, thinking of my sister, as I heaved and vomited up my breakfast. Chapter 2. The Serpent of the Nile. The heat in Luxor was not like the heat at home. It was a physical weight, a dry, dusty blanket that settled on your skin the moment the pressurized seal of the aircraft door hissed open. It smelled of diesel, ancient pulverized stone, and spices I couldn't name. Surprisingly, I liked it. It was a sharp, liberating contrast to the antiseptic chill of the private jet we had just vacated. But while the heat was freeing, the atmosphere among the group was suffocating. Under the guise of a happy gathering of old friends, the air crackled with nervousness. Everyone seemed tense, coiled tight, as if they didn't really want to be here but were being forced by some invisible gravity. I was wrestling 3 of Mrs. Sterling's Louis Vuitton hard-shell suitcases into the back of a black Mercedes van, while the judge stood 5 meters away, adjusting his sunglasses and pointing out landmarks. That's the valley over that ridge, Sterling was saying, his arms sweeping grandly, claiming the landscape as if he had litigated the rights to it. Where the kings sleep. I just want to know where the djinn sleeps, a voice croaked. That was Marcus Thorne. The property tycoon looked nothing like his photos in the Financial Review. In print, he was a silver fox of industry, a titan who turned swamplands into skylines. In person, standing on the curb of Luxor International Airport, he was a bloated, sweating mess. His linen suit, which likely cost more than my car, was already crumpled and stained with sweat around the collar. He held a silver flask openly in his hand, his eyes bloodshot and darting. "Pace yourself, Marcus," came a sharp-clipped female voice. I looked up, wiping a bead of sweat from my forehead before it could drip into my eyes. Martha Sterling was watching me. The judge's wife was a woman carved from ice and preserved by money. She wore a white, wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses that hid half her face, but I could feel the glare behind them. She didn't look at the bags I was heaving. She looked at my dress. It was a modest summer shift, but the way she inspected the hemline made me feel like I was wearing cheap lingerie. "Taylor, isn't it?" she said, though she knew exactly who I was. Every time she spoke to me, it was as if she were struggling to remember someone so small and insignificant. "Ensure the driver doesn't scratch the leather on that smaller case. It's ostrich skin." "Yes, Mrs. Sterling," I said, keeping my head down and biting my lip. "And try not to melt," she added, turning away. "William hates it when women glisten." I gritted my teeth and slammed the trunk shut. As she turned, another figure stepped out from the shadow of the terminal building, falling into step beside her. My breath hitched. I hadn't realized he was with us. He was tall, dressed in a sharp black suit that was entirely too formal and too dark for the Egyptian sun. He had a neatly trimmed goatee and eyes that seemed too large for his face, intense, dark, and unblinking. Dante, the illusionist. I had seen the invoices on the judge's desk a few weeks ago. Dante the Great, private consultation. I had assumed it was for a charity gala. But then I remembered the books I'd seen on Martha's nightstand when I dropped off files at their residence. The History of Mesmerism, Sleight of Hand for the Beginner. At the time, I thought it was a bizarre midlife hobby. Now, watching the way Dante leaned in to whisper something in Martha's ear, and the way Martha, usually so rigid, tilted her head back and laughed a little too breathily, a different theory took root. Is he the hobby? I wondered. He walked with a predator's grace, his hands empty while I hauled the luggage. He looked less like a magician and more like a gigolo hired to keep the judge's bored wife entertained while the men talked business. "Welcome to the cradle of civilization," Dante said, catching me staring. His voice was smooth, theatrical, but there was a metallic edge to it. "I'm just here to organize the bags," I said, deflecting. He smirked, a quick flash of white teeth. "We all have our burdens to carry." He stepped into the van with Martha sitting right beside her. Not opposite. Beside. I climbed into the front seat of the lead vehicle, separated from the elite by a partition. Through the glass, I watched the rest of the cast assemble. There was Arthur Penhaligon, the ex-prime minister. He looked smaller than he did on television, his famous posture stooped. Beside him sat his wife, Elena, the renowned news anchor. On screen, she was warm and relatable. Here, she looked brittle, checking her reflection in a compact mirror every 30 seconds, touching her face as if afraid it might crack in the heat. And then, there was the girl. She was sitting next to Marcus Thorne, looking aggressively bored. She couldn't have been older than me, 23, maybe 24. She was wearing a neon pink crop top and white shorts that left nothing to the imagination, and she was scrolling through her phone with an acrylic-nailed thumb, popping bubble gum with a steady snap, snap, snap. Chloe. The wives had already iced her out. I'd seen Elena roll her eyes when Chloe asked if there was Wi-Fi in the pyramids. To them, she was just the flavor of the month, a piece of candy Marcus had bought for the trip. We arrived at the dock just as the sun was beginning to dip, turning the Nile into a ribbon of molten gold. The boat, the Osiris, was breathtaking. It wasn't a modern cruise ship. It was a dahabeah, a traditional two-masted sailing boat, but upgraded for billionaires. It was all dark teak wood, billowing white sails and brass fittings that caught the dying light. It looked romantic. It also looked isolated. As we boarded, the crew, silent men in white galabeas, took the luggage from my hands. I finally had a moment to breathe. "Gather round!" Judge Sterling's voice boomed across the deck. I hurried over. The group had assembled on the aft deck, where a steward was pouring champagne. "I want you to meet everyone properly," Sterling said, placing a heavy hand on the small of my back. It was possessive, squeezing my waist just hard enough to be uncomfortable. I felt Martha's gaze burn into me from behind her sunglasses. She wasn't looking at the judge, she was looking at his hand on me. "This is Taylor," Sterling announced. "She's the one who made this all happen. If your pillows are fluffy, thank her." "Charmed," Arthur Penhaligon mumbled, barely looking at me. He was already reaching for a drink, his hands shaking slightly. "Does she make martinis?" Marcus Thorne asked, swaying. "Because the service on this tub is slow." "I'm sure she can learn," Sterling laughed. "Marcus, introduce your guest." Marcus grunted and pulled the girl in the pink top forward by her arm. "This is Chloe." Chloe looked up from her phone. She looked me up and down with vacant, glassy eyes. "Hi," she drawled, her voice a vocal fry that grated on the ears. "Cute shoes. Are they comfortable? I only wear heels. My calves are super sensitive." "They're fine," I said, forcing a polite smile. "Nice to meet you, Chloe." She turned back to Marcus, but as she did, she adjusted her purse strap. Her hand tapped the leather twice. Tap, tap. It was subtle. To anyone else, it was a nervous fidget. To me, it was a thunderclap. Status check. Green. I blinked once. A slow, deliberate blink. Received. "Whatever," Chloe sighed. "Babe, I'm bored. Can we go inside? The wind is messing up my hair extensions." "In a minute," Marcus snapped, embarrassed. "Perhaps," Dante's voice cut through the awkwardness. "We should toast to the journey." He stepped forward, lifting a glass. He wasn't standing with the staff. He was standing in the circle, shoulder to shoulder with Martha. "To the reunion," Dante said, his dark eyes scanning the group, lingering on the judge, then Arthur, then Marcus. "And to the secrets the river keeps." It was a strange toast. Too dark. Too knowing. Judge Sterling frowned, but he raised his glass. "To the reunion." "To the reunion," they muttered. The crew cast the ropes. The Osiris drifted away from the dock, the current catching the hull. The city of Luxor, with its noise and life, began to shrink behind us. I walked to the railing, needing to escape the judge's hand and the suffocating tension of the group. I looked down at the dark water. I felt a presence beside me. It was Mrs. Sterling. She wasn't looking at me. She was watching Dante, who was now performing a hypnosis trick for a terrified-looking Arthur Penhaligon on the other side of the deck. "He's talented, isn't he?" she said softly. Her voice lacked its usual venom. It sounded hungry. "Mr. Dante?" I asked cautiously. "He seems very intense." "Intensity is a rare quality," Martha said, her eyes fixed on the magician's hands. "Most men become dull with age. They become soft, predictable." She glanced at her husband, who was laughing loudly at his own joke. He seemed tight, coiled, more tense than usual, even for a workday, despite this supposedly being a relaxing holiday with friends. But magic requires control. It requires a firm hand. She turned to me, and the ice was back in her eyes. "Don't get in his way, Taylor. Dante is here for my amusement, not yours. She walked away, trailing her fingers along the railing as she approached him. I watched as she placed a hand on Dante's arm. He leaned down and whispered something to her, and she smiled, a genuine conspiratorial smile. My stomach churned. It wasn't just magic. She was sleeping with him. She had brought her lover on her husband's boat, right under his nose. I looked back toward the group. Marcus was yelling at a waiter. Chloe was taking a selfie, playing her part. The judge was watching me, a predator waiting for the gazelle to tire. And Martha was whispering to her dark magician. The boat turned a bend in the river, and the lights of Luxor vanished. We were alone on the Nile. Chapter 3. The First Trick. Dinner was served on the upper deck under a canopy of stars so bright they looked like spilt sugar. The air had cooled slightly, but the humidity clung to us, mixing with the scent of roasted lamb and the heavy, expensive perfume of the guests. I sat at the far end of the long table, the staff end. They treated me like staff. With the exception of Judge Sterling's occasional lecherous gazes, I was almost invisible to them. There was no one next to me, and the crew was below deck, only emerging when the bell was rung. Judge Sterling sat at the head, presiding over his court. Martha was to his right, slicing her meat with surgical precision. The wine had been flowing for 2 hours. For most, alcohol loosens tongues in a jovial way. For this group, it dissolved the thin veneer of civility they had been struggling to maintain since the airport. "A toast," Judge Sterling announced, standing up. He swayed slightly, his face flushed. "To the pact. To 20 years of success. To us." He raised his glass. No one joined him. Arthur Penhaligon stared at his wine as if it were poisoned. Elena was gripping her napkin so hard her knuckles were white. "Sit down, William," Marcus Thorne growled. He had abandoned his fork and was gripping a tumbler of scotch. "Stop the theater. We aren't here to celebrate. We're here because we were summoned." The table went deadly silent. The only sound was the lap of the river against the hull. Chloe was still taking selfies, oblivious to the tension in the room. "Marcus?" Martha said sharply, "not in front of the help." She flicked her gaze toward me, then back to her plate. "Oh, who cares about the secretary?" Marcus spat. He slammed his glass down. Ideally, it shouldn't have shattered, but he hit the table with enough force that the stem snapped, sending amber liquid bleeding across the white tablecloth. The sudden noise startled Chloe. She dropped her phone, and it hit the timber floors with a loud clatter. The room fell silent. "Damn it!" she exclaimed, before kneeling uncomfortably on the ground, crawling under the table whilst tugging down her short skirt. "I want to know which one of you sent it," Marcus snarled, ignoring her and pointing a shaking finger around the table. "Sent what, Marcus?" Arthur asked, his voice trembling. "The letter," Marcus shouted. "The creamy stationery, the typed font. The river remembers. It is time to honor the pact. Be on the Osiris or the files go public." He glared at the judge. "Was it you, William? Did you run out of money? Did you drag us out here to squeeze us for a bailout?" "Don't be ridiculous," Sterling snapped, though I noticed he looked paler than usual. "I received the same letter, Marcus. We all did." "So you say," Marcus sneered. He turned to Arthur. "What about you, Mr. Prime Minister? You've been looking very nervous, trying to clear your conscience before you die, dragging us all down with you?" "I have nothing to hide," Arthur said, but his voice cracked. He looked terrified. He turned to his wife before staring blankly at his glass and muttering, "But you are right. I should clear my conscience before I die." I sat perfectly still, making myself as small as possible. Internally, my heart was racing. The letters. A smart move. "It doesn't matter who sent them," Martha said, her voice icy and calm. "We are here. We are handling it. Now shut up and eat your lamb." "I can't eat," Marcus roared. "I can't stomach this charade." "Ouch!" Chloe's weak cry rang out. She had bumped her head on the underside of the table. The tension that had threatened to bubble over was cut by her cry, and then by a smooth voice. "Perhaps," the voice cut through the air. "What you need is a distraction." Dante stepped out of the shadows near the wheelhouse. He hadn't eaten with us. He had been lurking, watching, leaning against the railing like a carrion bird waiting for a meal. Martha looked up at him, and for a split second, her mask slipped. She looked relieved. She looked at him like he was her protector. "A trick?" Marcus sneered. "Go on then, wizard. Pull a rabbit out of my wallet. It's the only thing not empty." Dante moved to the center of the table. He didn't have props. No cards, no top hat. He just had those unsettling large eyes that seemed to absorb the light. "I don't do sleight of hand," Dante said softly. "I prefer sleight of mind. Objects hold memories. They hold the imprints of our sins." He reached out a hand toward Elena. "Mrs. Penhaligon, your ring. May I?" Elena hesitated, then slid a heavy emerald ring off her finger. Dante took it. He closed his eyes, his fingers tracing the gold band. "Heavy," he whispered. "Weighted with expectation. I feel anxiety. A camera lens. A script." He opened his eyes, staring right at her. And silence. "A story you wanted to tell, but couldn't. A headline you erased because someone told you to." Elena went pale. She snatched the ring back. "It's just jewelry," she snapped, her voice trembling. "Give it back." Dante turned to the judge. He didn't ask for an item. He just looked at him. "And you, Your Honor, you pride yourself on judgment, but I sense a verdict you regret. Not a legal one, a moral one. A gavel struck 20 years ago that still echoes." The judge stiffened. "That's enough, Dante. This parlor game is tedious." "Is it?" Dante turned finally to Marcus. The illusionist smiled, and it wasn't a friendly smile. "And you, Mr. Thorne. You are the loudest voice in the room, but you are the most afraid." "I fear nothing," Marcus roared, standing up. The chair screeched against the deck. "You fear the letter," Dante said calmly. "You fear the writer is sitting at this table." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried on the wind. "And you're right to be afraid, because the person who brought you here, they aren't looking for money, Marcus. They're looking for blood." The color drained from Marcus's face so fast it left him gray. For a second he looked sober. He looked terrified. Then, the rage returned. "You hack!" Marcus shouted. He threw his broken glass stem at Dante. It missed, skittering across the deck. "I didn't come here to be psychoanalyzed by Martha's boy toy. I paid for this trip. I paid for all of you." He pointed a shaking finger at the judge. "I know it was you, William. You and your greedy wife." Then he spun on Chloe, who had shrunk back in her chair, scrolling furiously on her phone. "And you," he screamed. "Stop looking at that damn phone. Who are you texting? Are you part of this? Are you spying on me?" "Babe, chill," Chloe said, her voice trembling, though I saw her thumb hover over the screen. "I'm just playing Candy Crush." "Liar!" Marcus lunged at her, grabbing her wrist. "You're all vultures." "Marcus, let her go," Sterling commanded, finding his courtroom baritone. Marcus shoved Chloe back into her chair. "I'm going to my cabin. If anyone disturbs me, if anyone comes near that door, I'll shoot them. You hear me? I have a gun, and I'll use it." He lurched away, disappearing down the stairs to the lower deck where the staterooms were. Silence descended on the upper deck. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the distant cry of a night heron. "Well," Martha said, picking up her fork as if nothing had happened. That was dramatic. Taylor, tell the steward to sweep up the glass. Yes, Mrs. Sterling. I got up, my legs shaking. The tension was thick enough to choke on. I rang the bell and signaled the steward, a young Egyptian man who rushed in, and helped him pick up the shards. The dinner continued in a surreal, stilted manner. Arthur and Elena whispered furiously to each other, casting suspicious glances at the judge. The judge drank deeply from his glass, his eyes fixed on the darkness where Dante had retreated. Chloe sat frozen, staring at her empty plate. Under the table, I saw her leg bouncing nervously. I should go check on him, Chloe whispered after 10 minutes. Her voice was small. Leave him, Martha said sharply. Ideally, he'll pass out and we won't see him until breakfast. He really does have a gun, Chloe said. He showed it to me. He said he needed it because he didn't trust the snakes. Christ, Arthur muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. I'll go, I said. The words came out before I could stop them. I didn't want to go. I was terrified of Marcus Thorne, but I needed to know if he had passed out. Good girl, Sterling said, not looking at me. Be careful. He's a mean drunk. I walked to the stairs. The lower deck was dimly lit, a long corridor with cabin doors on either side. The engine thrum was louder down here, vibrating through the floorboards. I walked past my own cabin, past the illusionists. Marcus and Chloe had the master suite at the stern. I approached the door. I could hear muttering inside. Angry, incoherent muttering. Then, the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the wood. Crack. The sound wasn't like it is in the movies. It wasn't a boom. It was a sharp, flat pop, like a firecracker set off in a tin can. I jumped back, my heart stopping. Marcus, I called out. Silence. Marcus. I heard footsteps behind me. The others were rushing down the stairs. The judge, Arthur, then Dante. What was that? Sterling demanded, breathless. A gunshot, I whispered. I think it was a gunshot. Sterling pushed past me. He tried the handle. Locked. Marcus, open this door. No answer. Dante, help me, Sterling barked. The two men threw their shoulders against the dark wood. Once. Twice. On the third hit, the lock splintered and the door swung open. The smell hit us first. Cordite and copper. The room was a mess of overturned furniture, and there, in the center of the Persian rug, lay Marcus Thorne. He was on his back, his eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. A small dark hole was centered perfectly in his forehead. A halo of blood was spreading slowly across the rug, and standing over him, pressed against the far wall, was Chloe. She was shaking so violently her teeth were chattering, her mascara was running down her cheeks, and in her hand, gripped so tight her knuckles were white, was a silver revolver. She gasped, looking at us with wild, terrified eyes. Don't move, Sterling shouted, stepping into the room. Drop the weapon, now! Chloe looked at the gun in her hand as if she had never seen it before. She dropped it. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. I didn't do it, she sobbed, collapsing to her knees. He was screaming about the letters. He said he knew who sent them. He said he was going to kill them. I stood in the doorway, frozen. I looked at the dead man who had poisoned the earth. I looked at the girl who was playing the part of the hysterical suspect perfectly. And I looked at Dante. He wasn't looking at the body. He was looking at Chloe, and then he shifted his gaze to Martha, who was standing just behind me. Martha wasn't looking at the body either. She was looking at Arthur, and on her face was a look of pure, icy satisfaction. Chapter 4. The Locked Room. The smell of death is not something you forget. It's not just the blood, that coppery, metallic tang that sits on the back of your tongue like a dirty coin. It's the smell of the void, a vacuum where a person used to be. For a full 10 seconds, no one moved. We were a tableau of horror framed by the splintered doorframe and the man who was now just meat on a rug, surrounded by a pool of blood. Is he? Arthur Penhaligon's voice was a dry croak. He leaned against the doorframe, looking green. Judge Sterling stepped into the room. He didn't look like a friend mourning a loss, just a coroner at a crime scene. He crouched beside Marcus, checking for a pulse that clearly wasn't there. He was careful not to step in the blood. "He's gone," Sterling said, straightening up. "Massive trauma. Instant." He turned his cold blue eyes to Chloe. She was still on her knees, rocking back and forth, sobbing into her hands. The silver revolver lay on the carpet between them, a lethal piece of evidence that seemed to pulse under the cabin lights. "Martha!" Sterling barked, his voice echoing in the small space. Mrs. Sterling appeared in the doorway. She took in the scene, the body, the gun, the girl, with a terrifying lack of emotion. She didn't scream. She simply adjusted her shawl. "Get the girl out of here," Sterling ordered. "Take her to the spare cabin on the lower deck, the one without a balcony. Lock her in." "No," Chloe shrieked, looking up. Her face was a ruin of mascara and tears. "I didn't do it. I swear I didn't shoot him." "We found you holding the gun, young lady," Arthur said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and self-righteousness. He wouldn't look at the body. He kept glancing at Martha, as if waiting for instructions. "We broke down the door. You were the only one inside." "I picked it up," Chloe screamed, scrambling backward as Martha approached her. "I was in the bathroom. I heard the bang. I came out. And he was just there. I picked it up because I was scared. I thought someone was in the room." "The door was locked from the inside, Chloe," Sterling said, his voice dropping to that dangerous, quiet register he used when sentencing criminals. "There was no one else here." "The balcony!" she gasped. "The sliding door was open. Someone could have jumped." Sterling glanced at the glass doors leading to the private deck. They were indeed slightly ajar, the curtains fluttering in the night breeze. Beyond them lay the dark, churning Nile. "We are in the middle of the river," Sterling said dismissively. "Unless a fish climbed aboard, shot him, and swam away, you are the only suspect." "Martha, move her." Martha grabbed Chloe by the arm. Her grip looked painful. "Come along. Don't make this difficult." Chloe thrashed, her eyes finding mine. Desperate and alone, a deer trapped among wolves, she pleaded. "Taylor, tell them. You believe me, right? I didn't do it." I froze. The raw desperation in her voice made my stomach turn. I looked at the judge. He was watching me, gauging my reaction. My eyes watered with fear as my body shook, playing the part of the terrified witness perfectly. "Taylor," Sterling said smoothly, "go with Martha, help her secure the girl, then bring me the key." I felt his strong hand on my shoulder, pushing me towards Chloe as Arthur stepped in to help tie her hands. Helpless, I followed them down the narrow corridor. The air felt heavy, suffocating. The Osiris suddenly felt very small. We were miles from the nearest city, drifting in the dark, and there was a corpse in the master suite. We reached the spare cabin, a small windowless room usually reserved for extra crew or storage. Martha shoved Chloe inside. Chloe stumbled, falling onto the narrow bunk, her hands tied behind her back. "Mrs. Sterling, please," Chloe begged. "I need my phone. I need to call a lawyer." "There is no signal out here," Martha said coldly. "And you don't need a lawyer. You need a priest." Martha turned to me. "Stay here. Watch the door. I'm going to find the captain and tell him to cut the engines. We can't dock with a murder on board until we figure out the narrative." "The narrative?" I asked, bewildered. The story, Taylor, she snapped. We need to control the scandal. Arthur and William need to discuss the implications. She marched off down the hall, her heels clicking on the wood. I watched her go. She didn't head for the captain's quarters. She headed toward Arthur Penhaligon, who was waiting at the end of the hall, wringing his hands. I stood alone in front of the closed door. I could hear Chloe weeping on the other side. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I looked left, then right. The corridor was empty. I leaned close to the wood. Chloe, I whispered. The sobbing stopped instantly, a shuffle of movement. Then, her voice, right against the crack of the door, clear and calm. I didn't do it. Do you believe me? She whispered. What happened? I whispered back. He was so angry, she hissed. He kept muttering about the leverage, saying they can't touch him, otherwise they will all go down. I asked him what it was, and he slapped me. I ran into the bathroom and locked the door. He was drunk. It could have gotten worse. He kept shouting and kicking things, knocking things around. She paused, catching her breath. He said he had insurance. You have to find it. I'll try, I said, but the judge has the room sealed. Taylor! I jumped back from the door. Dante was standing at the end of the corridor. He moved so silently I hadn't heard him approach. He walked toward me, his black coat swaying. He didn't look like a performer anymore. He looked sharp, alert. Dante stopped in front of me. He looked at the door, then at me. His eyes were unreadable. A locked room mystery, he mused. Classic. The door is locked from the inside. The victim is shot. The suspect is found with the weapon. The judge has already reached his verdict. He seems very sure, I said carefully. He does, Dante agreed. But the judge is a man who sees what he wants to see. He sees a hysterical girl and a convenient solution. He leaned in closer. Did she tell you about the balcony? I hesitated. Yes. I checked it, Dante said softly. Before Sterling shooed me out, the railing on the balcony, there was a smudge, a wet handprint. Someone climbed from the railing of the adjacent cabin. My breath caught. Who is in the adjacent cabin? Dante's eyes glinted in the low light. Arthur and Elena Penhaligon, the ex-prime minister and the news anchor. Why are you telling me this? I asked, suspicion narrowing my eyes. You're with Martha. I saw you. Dante smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I am whoever Mrs. Sterling needs me to be. Right now, she needs a confidant. But you, Taylor, you need a friend. He held out a heavy iron key. Martha dropped this on the stairs. He lied smoothly. I believe it locks this door. I took the key. It was cold in my hand. Lock her in, Taylor, Dante said, for her own safety. If there is a killer roaming the decks, one who can climb balconies, a locked door is the only thing keeping her alive. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the upper deck. As he walked, I saw him adjust his cuffs, slipping back into the role of the aloof magician. I stared at the key. Chloe's words echoed in my mind. Insurance. And Dante's words. A wet handprint. I inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The mechanism clicked, a heavy final sound. I'll be back, I whispered to the wood. I walked back toward the stairs, my legs feeling like lead. I had to go back to the crime scene. The Osiris drifted on, a floating coffin in the middle of the desert night. Chapter 5. Cracks in the Facade. The sun rose over the Nile as if nothing had happened. It was a brutal, blinding disk that turned the river into a sheet of hammered copper. The birds were singing in the reeds, and the crew was scrubbing the decks with rhythmic swishing sounds. But inside the Osiris, the air was poisonous. I hadn't slept. Every creak of the boat sounded like a footstep. Every shift of the wind sounded like a scream. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the closed door of my cabin, wondering who was locked in and who was locked out. At 8 a.m., a sharp knock made me jump. "Taylor." It was the judge's voice. I smoothed my skirt, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Judge Sterling looked immaculate, though the strain was visible in the tightness around his eyes. He was shaved, showered, and wearing a crisp polo shirt and beige trousers. "Breakfast is being served on the aft deck," he said calmly. "We need to maintain a sense of normalcy until we reach Edfu. The authorities will meet us there." Is Chloe okay?" I asked, playing the concerned witness. "She is secure," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "She's been given a sedative. It's for the best. We can't have her screaming about conspiracies." "Conspiracies, sir?" "The nonsense about the letters," Sterling said, waving a dismissive hand. "She's trying to muddy the waters. Come." I followed him up to the deck. The table was set with fresh fruit, pastries, and silver pots of coffee. It looked like a spread for a lifestyle magazine, except for the empty chair at the end of the table, Marcus's chair. Arthur Penhaligon was reading a newspaper on his tablet, his fingers scrolling aggressively. He looked haggard, his eyes bloodshot. He kept glancing toward the stairs, as if expecting the ghost of Marcus to walk up and pour a drink. Elena was worse. The famous news anchor, usually the picture of poised perfection, looked like she was held together by hairspray and Xanax. She was wearing oversized sunglasses, and her hand shook as she lifted a glass of what looked like tomato juice but smelled sharply of vodka. "Good morning," Sterling announced, taking his seat at the head of the table. Arthur grunted. Elena didn't look up. "I've spoken to the captain," Sterling continued, unfolding his napkin. "We will dock in Edfu in 3 hours. I have a contact in the Ministry of Interior. They will handle the investigation discreetly. We must be unified in our statement." "Unified?" Arthur snapped, putting down his tablet. "Marcus was shot in the head, William. This isn't a board vote, it's a murder inquiry." "And we know who did it," Sterling said smoothly. "The girl was unstable. She was gold-digging. He threatened to cut her off, she snapped. It's a tragedy, but a simple one." "Is it?" Elena whispered. Everyone looked at her. "What was that, Elena?" Sterling asked, his voice dropping an octave. Elena took a long swallow of her drink. "He was shouting about the letters, William. Last night. The river remembers. Marcus was scared. He said one of us betrayed the pact. The Blackwood deal, it will be our downfall. Someone is here for revenge." "Marcus was drunk," Sterling corrected. "He was raving." Sterling stared at her. It was a look of pure, unadulterated menace masked as concern. "Elena, my dear," he said softly, "you are in shock. You're imagining things. There is no Blackwood deal. That was 20 years ago. It's finished." He turned to me. "Taylor, Mrs. Penhaligon is clearly unwell. Why don't you escort her to the lounge, get her some water, maybe some tea?" "Yes, sir." I stood up and moved to Elena's side. "Come on, Mrs. Penhaligon. Let's get you out of the sun." Elena let me help her up. She felt frail, trembling under my hand. As we walked away, I looked back. Martha Sterling had just arrived on deck. She walked straight to Arthur, placing a hand on his shoulder. It looked like comfort to the casual observer, but I saw her fingers dig into his muscle, a warning or a claim. I led Elena into the indoor lounge. It was cool and dark, with plush sofas and air conditioning that hummed quietly. I sat her down and poured a glass of water from a carafe. "Here," I said gently. "Drink this." Elena took the glass with both hands. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were terrified, rimmed with red. They're going to let her take the fall, she whispered. That poor girl. I sat on the coffee table in front of her, leaning in close. My heart beat faster. This was it. The weak link. Who, Elena? I asked softly. Who are they going to let take the fall? Chloe, she said. William has it all worked out. He writes the script, and everyone else just reads the lines. You mentioned the Blackwood deal, I prodded, keeping my voice innocent. What was that? Why was Marcus so scared? Elena looked at the door, then back at me. The vodka was talking now, loosening the latch on her secrets. It was a development, she murmured. We were all younger, hungrier. Marcus found the land. It was toxic, industrial waste. But it was cheap. So cheap. She took a shuddering breath. Arthur rezoned it. William handled the lawsuits. And I spun the story. I went on the 6 o'clock news and told the world it was safe. I called the environmental report a forgery. My hands clenched in my lap. My father's report. They had destroyed it. They had destroyed him to build luxury apartments on a graveyard. And Marcus? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Marcus kept the real report, she said, tears leaking from her eyes. He kept everything. The bribery receipts, the soil samples, the names of the people who disappeared. He called it his insurance policy. He brought it with him. Where is it, Elena? In his luggage, she hissed. He told me, if I die, the suitcase sings. That's what he said. She grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Arthur has been on antidepressants all this time, she whispered, her voice fierce and desperate. What we did, no matter how much charity and good we do, it never seems to undo the past. Taylor, you are young. Don't make the mistakes we made. Money and power is a poison that eats away your flesh and happiness. Her eyes became steely and blank. She released my wrist and slumped back against the cushions. I can't do this anymore, she sobbed. I see their faces, the families, the children who got sick. Those people who died, who paved our wealth, have come back to haunt us. This is the ending we deserve. I stood up. I had the location, the suitcase. You need to rest, Elena, I said. I'm going to get you a cool towel. Don't leave me alone, she begged. I'll be right back. I promise. I walked out of the lounge and into the corridor. My heart was racing. I needed to get to Marcus's cabin. I needed to find that suitcase before the judge did. But as I turned the corner toward the stairs, I ran straight into a solid wall of black fabric. Dante. He was standing there, blocking my path. He wasn't smiling. You're playing a dangerous game, Taylor, he said. I'm just doing my job, I said, trying to step around him. He moved to block me. I saw you in there, with Elena. You were asking a lot of questions for a secretary. My stomach dropped. She was upset. I was trying to calm her down. Don't lie to the professional liar, Dante said. His voice was low, urgent. You know about Blackwood. You know about the suitcase. He grabbed my arm and pulled me into the shadow of the stairwell. Listen to me. The judge is upstairs distracting Arthur, but Martha, she's not on the deck. Where is she? She went below, Dante whispered. She's in Marcus's cabin right now. She's looking for the insurance. We have to stop her, I said, panic rising. No, Dante said firmly. If you go down there now, you'll catch her in the act, and a woman like Martha Sterling doesn't leave witnesses. So we just let her take it? We let her find nothing, Dante said. A strange glint appeared in his eye. Because I already picked the lock an hour ago. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver flash drive. The files aren't in the suitcase anymore, he smiled. They're right here. I stared at the drive. You stole the evidence? I secured it, he corrected. But now we have a problem. Martha will tear that room apart. When she doesn't find it, she's going to realize someone got there first. She's going to come looking for the leak. Elena, I realized with horror. Marcus told Elena about the insurance. That means Arthur will know. And if Arthur knows, then Martha knows. If Martha thinks Elena has it. Exactly, Dante said. Elena is the loose end. I left her in the lounge, I gasped. I have to go back. Taylor, wait. I broke away from him and ran back down the corridor. I didn't care about being quiet. I didn't care about the judge. I burst into the lounge. Elena, we have to… I stopped. The lounge was empty. The glass of water sat on the table, a ring of condensation forming on the wood. The sliding glass door to the deck was open. I ran to the railing. The Nile rushed by below, churning and dark. There was no one there, but on the deck chair, neatly placed, were Elena's oversized sunglasses, and beside them, a small, empty vial of pills. I looked over the side of the boat. The wake was white and foamy. Man overboard, I screamed, my voice tearing through the morning silence. Man overboard. But even as I screamed, I knew it was too late. The cracks in the facade hadn't just appeared. The whole wall had just come crashing down. Chapter 6. Silent River. The Nile didn't want to give her back. It took 10 minutes of shouting in Arabic, the grinding of the reverse engines, and the frantic work of 3 deckhands to haul Elena Penhaligon out of the water. They laid her on the teak planks of the lower swim platform. Her expensive linen trousers were sodden, clinging to her legs like a second skin. Her hair, usually sprayed into a helmet of perfection, was plastered across her face in dark, wet ribbons. She was gone. There was no need for CPR, though Arthur Penhaligon tried. He knelt beside her, pumping her chest with a rhythm that was too fast, too desperate. Elena, breathe! Damn it, breathe! Judge Sterling stood over them. He wasn't helping. He was standing with his arms crossed, checking his watch, his face a mask of grim calculation. Arthur, Sterling said, his voice cutting through the panic. Stop, she's gone. Arthur collapsed back onto his heels, gasping for air. She just fell. She must have slipped. She didn't slip, Arthur, Sterling said. He held up a plastic bag containing the empty pill vial. We found this in the lounge. It was suicide. Tragic. I stood by the railing, shivering in the heat. It was a lie. Elena was terrified of them. She wanted to confess, not die. Martha Sterling descended the stairs. She had changed into a fresh outfit, white linen, spotless. She stopped 3 steps from the bottom, looking at the body with the same expression she'd used when looking at the scratched luggage earlier that day. Annoyance, inconvenience. She walked past her husband and put a hand on Arthur's wet shoulder. She's at peace now, Arthur, Martha said. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were hard, drilling into him. She was weak. She couldn't handle the pressure. It's better this way. Arthur looked at her. His lips trembled. He looked like he wanted to scream, to accuse, to mourn, but he just nodded, broken. Is it done? Martha asked the judge, ignoring the dead woman entirely. I have messaged my contact, Sterling said. We dock in Edfu at noon. The chief of police there owes me a favor. He will handle the formalities. It will be ruled a suicide before the sun sets. How long? Martha asked. 3 hours, Sterling replied. He turned his cold blue eyes to me. Taylor, go to your cabin. Do not leave. Do not speak to the crew. This is a family matter. Yes, sir. I walked away, my legs stiff. I felt the crosshairs on my back. The threat wasn't a hitman. It was the system itself. Once we docked, the judge would use his power to bury the truth, just like he buried the Blackwood report. I reached the lower deck corridor. It was empty. I didn't go to my cabin. I slipped into the utility closet near the engine room, leaving the door cracked just an inch. I waited. 5 minutes later, I heard footsteps. 2 sets. One dragging and heavy, the other sharp and clicking. Martha and Arthur. They stopped outside Marcus's door. Martha swiped the master key card. The lock disengaged with a beep. She pushed Arthur inside and followed him, the door clicking shut but not latching fully. I crept closer, moving out of the closet and pressing my back against the wall next to the doorframe, straining to hear over the hum of the engine. My finger pressed the small record button on my necklace. "Start searching," Martha ordered. "Martha, I can't." Arthur's voice was a broken whimper. "My wife is dead. She's lying on the deck wrapped in a sheet." "She is dead because she was a liability," Martha replied. Her low, soft voice cut with cruel words. "And now, you are going to find that memory card, or you will join her." I heard the sound of drawers being ripped open and contents dumped onto the floor. "You should have kept her under control, Arthur," Martha murmured. It was the tone of a disappointed mother scolding a child. "You knew she was cracking. You should have upped the meds, dosed her, kept her sedated until we were done." Arthur stayed quiet. There was only the sound of him shuffling through the debris, doing as he was told. "She was your problem," Martha continued, her voice silky and terrifying. "And you failed. Just like you failed to rezone the land properly 20 years ago, always leaving messes for me to clean up." "It was Marcus's idea," Arthur snapped, his voice shaking. "You and William profited enormously off it. He forced me." Martha laughed. It was a quiet, chilling sound. "No one forced you. That deal funded your political career. That deal made you who you are, your legacy, your position, and your power. William and Marcus did not force you, just like no one forced you into my bed. Martha, you are the death of me," he said weakly. "Now that Elena is out of the picture, that's one less guilt you have to carry," she said. "Elena shouldn't have jumped. The guilt was too much for her," he muttered, sounding like he was trying to convince himself. "Don't lie to me, darling," she whispered, stepping closer to him. I could see their shadows merge on the floor. The tension was palpable. "It was an accident," Arthur pleaded, his voice thick with guilt. "Elena, she fell." "I was on the upper deck taking the air," Martha said coldly. "The moonlight was very clear. I saw the struggle. I saw the shove." Arthur let out a choked sound of rage. You watched?" "I watched you solve a problem," Martha said. "But now, even more so, I own you, Arthur, body and soul. If you don't find that drive, I won't just let William destroy you. I'll tell the police exactly what I saw." Arthur slammed something onto a table, a book maybe. "You witch! We were supposed to be in this together." The raw fury in his voice made me jump. I shifted my weight involuntarily, and the floorboard beneath my sandal let out a sharp, high-pitched creak. In the silence of the corridor, it sounded like a scream. Inside the room, the argument stopped instantly. "What was that?" Martha hissed. I froze, pressing myself flat against the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I heard Martha's heels clicking toward the door. She was coming. There was nowhere to run. If I moved now, she would see my shadow stretch across the threshold. The door handle began to turn. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the confrontation. Suddenly, there was a rush of movement inside the room. "Martha, wait!" Arthur's voice was desperate, ragged. He grabbed her. I heard the rustle of fabric, A sharp intake of breath from Martha, and then silence. I risked a glance through the crack in the door. Arthur had pulled Martha away from the door. He had her pressed against the wall, his hands tangled in her hair, kissing her with a savage, desperate intensity. It wasn't romantic. It was a collision of rage, fear, and toxic need. Martha hesitated for a second, then melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck, pulling him closer. I stared, wide-eyed. The undeniable proof. The statesman and the judge's wife, locked in a passionate embrace over the wreckage of a dead man's room. While they were distracted by their own twisted dynamic, I exhaled the breath I had been holding. I didn't wait. I slipped off my shoes, holding them in my hand, and sprinted silently down the corridor in my bare feet. I reached my cabin, threw myself inside, and locked the bolt. I leaned against the door, gasping for air. Dante was sitting on my bed, shuffling cards. Rip, snap. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, not looking up. "Better," I whispered, my chest heaving. I saw the truth. Martha and Arthur. They're lovers, Dante. I saw them kissing. Dante looked up, a slow smile spreading across his face. Perfect. And I heard them, I continued, the adrenaline making my words spill out fast. Martha told Arthur the judge doesn't know about the money they stole, and she told Arthur she saw him push Elena overboard. She's blackmailing him. Cruelty creates cracks, Dante said softly. He stood up and walked to the porthole. And you just found the hammer to shatter them. We have 3 hours, I said, checking my watch, before the judge's pet police chief arrives and buries everything. Dante turned, his eyes intense. Then we have 3 hours to turn this boat into a psychological torture chamber. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small, high-end digital recorder. We split up, Dante said. I'll take Arthur. I'll use his guilt and fear against him. You take the judge. Me? You're the loyal secretary, Dante said. Go to him. Tell him what you saw. The kiss. The intimacy. Tell him you think Martha and Arthur are plotting against him. He pressed the recorder into my hand. The judge's ego is his weakest point. If he thinks his wife and best friend are making a fool of him, he will tear them apart to reassert control. And when he confronts them, we get it on tape. I clipped the recorder to the inside of my blouse, right over my racing heart. Okay, I whispered. Let's go break them. Chapter 7. Judas' Kiss. I stopped outside the heavy oak door of the judge's private study just off the wheelhouse. My hands were shaking, but this time I didn't try to steady them. I needed the tremors. I reached into my purse, pulled out the small flask I had swiped from the bar cart, and took a swig of brandy. I didn't swallow it. I gargled it, letting the sharp, stinging liquid coat my tongue and throat, then spat it onto the deck. I splashed a little on my collar. I needed to smell like fear and bad decisions. I messed up my hair, unbuttoned the top button of my blouse to show just a hint of lace, and pinched my cheeks until they burned. Showtime, I told myself. I pushed the door open without knocking. Judge Sterling was pacing. He looked up, furious at the intrusion, his mouth opening to bark a reprimand. William? I slurred slightly, stumbling over the threshold. He froze. I had never called him by his first name. I had never been anything but Miss Eris, the efficient, invisible machine. Taylor? He stepped forward, his brow furrowing. You've been drinking. I told you to stay in your cabin. I couldn't be alone, I whimpered, closing the door and leaning back against it, as if my legs wouldn't hold me. The silence. It's too loud. I'm so scared, William. I looked up at him through my lashes, letting my eyes fill with tears. I don't know who to trust. Everyone is whispering. Everyone is lying. You're the only one who makes sense. Sterling's posture shifted. The aggression melted into something far more dangerous, paternalistic condescension mixed with hunger. He walked over to me. "You are safe here," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "I am in control." "I know," I breathed. I took a step toward him and let myself fall forward. He caught me. His arms went around my waist, strong and possessive. I rested my head against his chest, listening to the thud of his heart. It was slow, steady. The heart of a man who slept soundly while innocent people died. "I've always felt safe with you," I lied, my voice muffled against his shirt. I traced a finger down his lapel. "Even in the office, all those late nights, I used to watch you. The way you command a room, the way you make the world obey you." I looked up, meeting his watery blue eyes. "It's intoxicating." Sterling stared at me. His ego, already bruised by the chaos of the trip, drank up the adoration like water in a desert. He tightened his grip. "Taylor," he murmured, "you're a very intelligent young woman. I've always thought so." "I've tried to hide it," I whispered, walking my fingers up his chest to his neck. "My feelings. I didn't want to ruin your marriage. I respected Martha too much." I let a sob escape, burying my face in his neck again. I forced myself to endure the smell of his cologne, sandalwood, and the musk of an old man. It made my stomach churn, but I pressed closer. "But now," I sobbed, "after what I saw, I can't protect her anymore. I need you. I need your protection." Sterling pulled back slightly, holding my shoulders. "What did you see, Taylor?" I bit my lip, looking away. "I can't. It will break your heart." "Tell me," he commanded. "I went to Marcus's room," I whispered. "I heard noises. I thought someone was hurting Mrs. Sterling. But when I looked," I squeezed my eyes shut. "Arthur was there. They were fighting at first. But then, she kissed him, William. She kissed him like she owned him." Sterling went rigid. His hands on my arms turned into iron clamps. "You saw them?" "I heard them too," I rushed on, pouring gasoline on the fire. "She told him not to worry about the money. She said you were just a shield. She said you were too arrogant to notice they were skimming the accounts right under your nose." The silence that followed was terrifying. I felt the heat radiating off him, a nuclear meltdown of pride. "A shield," he repeated, his voice barely audible. "She said you were useful," I whispered, stroking his cheek. "But she said she didn't need you anymore. Not really." He slapped my hand away. It wasn't violent toward me. It was a reflex of pure rage. He turned away, grabbing a heavy crystal decanter from his desk and hurling it against the wall. It shattered, raining glass and scotch onto the floor. "She mocks me!" he roared. "In my own house, on my own boat!" He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the door. He was looking at retribution. He marched to his desk and unlocked the bottom drawer. He pulled out the black semi-automatic pistol I had seen in his safe back home. "Stay here," he snarled. "William, don't." I feigned terror, reaching for him but intentionally missing. "They'll hurt you." "No one hurts me," he hissed, his eyes dead and cold. "I am the law." He stormed out of the room, the gun gripped tight in his hand. As soon as the heavy door clicked shut, I dropped the act. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, scrubbing away the phantom sensation of his breath. I didn't have time to vomit. I grabbed my shoes and ran, not toward the lounge, where the gunshots would soon ring out. I ran down the back stairs, into the belly of the ship. The air was hotter down here, smelling of diesel and damp wood. I reached the brig, the windowless storage room where they had locked the suspect. "Chloe," I hissed, fumbling with the keys I had swiped from the judge's desk during our embrace. "Taylor?" Her voice came from the other side, small and tight. I shoved the key into the lock and twisted. The door swung open. Chloe, my Chloe, was sitting on a crate of life jackets. Her mascara was smeared, her blonde hair tangled, but the moment she saw me, the vacant party girl expression vanished. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and filled with the same cold fire that burned in mine. "Did you do it?" she asked, standing up. "He's heading to the lounge," I said, breathless. "He knows about the affair. He has a gun." "Good," Chloe said. "Let them tear each other apart." I reached into my bra and pulled out the silver flash drive, the real one. I grabbed Chloe's hand and pressed it into her palm along with the key to my cabin. "Take this," I ordered. "Go to my cabin. Lock the door. Hide in the vent we loosened yesterday." "What?" Chloe gripped my hand. "No. We leave together. That was the plan." "The plan changed," I said. "The judge called a cleaner. If I'm not up there when the police arrive, they'll search the boat. I have to be the witness. I have to guide them to the bodies." "Taylor, no." Chloe's voice cracked. "I can't lose you too." I cupped her face. I didn't see the bimbo influencer the world saw. I saw Sarah Vance. I saw the girl I had met at a support group for families of suicide victims 3 years ago. I saw the girl who had held my hand at my father's funeral after they staged his car accident. I saw the girl who had cried with me when her father, the site inspector who tried to warn the press, was found overdosed in a motel room he had never checked into. We weren't strangers. We were sisters in grief. We had spent 2 years building these identities. Taylor, the meek secretary. Chloe, the gold-digging influencer. We had infiltrated their lives, learned their schedules, and orchestrated this entire trip with a single anonymous letter. "You won't lose me," I promised her. "But this drive, this is our father's legacy. It's the proof that they weren't crazy. It's the proof that they were heroes." I squeezed her hand. "If I don't make it off this boat, you take this drive to the federal prosecutor in Cairo. You finish it, Sarah. You finish it for them." Chloe, Sarah, looked at me, tears streaming down her face. She nodded once, a sharp, jerky motion. "For them," she whispered. "Go!" I pushed her toward the corridor. "Run!" She didn't look back. She sprinted toward my cabin, clutching the metal drive like a holy relic. I watched her go, then turned back toward the stairs. Above me, I heard a muffled shout. And then, the unmistakable crack of a gunshot. I smoothed my skirt. I messed up my hair again. I summoned the tears. I walked up the stairs to watch the monsters die. Chapter 8. The Mad Judge. The gunshot was still ringing in my ears when I burst into the lounge. The smell was the first thing to hit me, sharp, acrid cordite mixed with the copper tang of fresh blood. Arthur Penhaligon was on the floor, curled into a fetal ball, clutching his stomach. Blood was seeping through his fingers, staining the expensive Persian rug a deep, sickening crimson. He was making low, wet, gurgling sounds, staring at the ceiling with eyes full of regret. Martha Sterling, the woman of ice and iron, was on her knees near the sofa. She wasn't fighting. She was cowering, her hands raised in a pathetic shield, her face streaked with mascara and terror. And standing over them, a smoking gun in his hand, was Judge William Sterling. He didn't look like a man who had just shot his best friend. He looked exhilarated. His eyes were wide and bright, manic with the rush of absolute power. The mask of the distinguished jurist had melted away, revealing the rabid animal underneath. He leveled the gun at Martha's head. "You made me a fool," he whispered, his voice trembling with rage, "in my own court." "William, please," Martha sobbed, her voice high and thin. "I can fix this. We can fix this." "The only fix is a clean slate," Sterling said, his finger tightening on the trigger. "No!" I screamed. I threw myself across the room. I didn't think. I just reacted. If he killed Martha now, the chain of evidence broke. I needed her alive. I needed her to trade the bank accounts, the names, the dates. I slammed into the judge's arm just as the gun went off. Bang! The bullet went wide, shattering the mirror behind the bar. Shards of glass rained down on us like jagged confetti. "You stupid girl!" Sterling roared. He backhanded me. It wasn't a slap. It was a bludgeon. The heavy barrel of the gun connected with my cheekbone, and the world exploded into white light. I hit the floor hard, tasting blood. My vision swam. I tried to push myself up, but he kicked me in the ribs. I gasped, the air leaving my lungs in a painful whoosh, and collapsed again, wheezing. Sterling loomed over me, a giant in a beige linen suit. He looked down at me not with hatred but with contempt. To him, I wasn't even an enemy. I was an annoyance. "Why are you here, Taylor? You should have stayed in your room and waited for me to clean house. But now you have seen and heard too much." He spat. He grabbed a handful of my hair and yanked my head back, forcing me to look at him. "You are a toy, Taylor. You are a decoration I keep on my desk. You exist because I allow it." He let go of my hair and shoved me back down. My head cracked against the floorboards. "William, please," I cried, forcing soft, pitiful tears to spill over, playing the part he expected. "I know it was all an accident. You didn't mean to kill Arthur. I just don't want you to stain your hands with blood." "I am the most powerful man in this country," he announced, his voice booming off the walls, feeding off my submission. "My words are the law. When I say a man is guilty, he rots. When I say a company is innocent, the stocks rise. I decide what is truth. This isn't the man I idolize. Please, William." I pressed on, baiting him, building his ego higher and higher. He laughed, a sound devoid of humor, and bent down, brutally lifting my chin with the cold barrel of the gun. He tapped the metal against my bruised cheek. So beautiful, but so stupid. He turned his rage back to Martha. She was trembling, huddled on the floor. But as I looked at her through my swollen eye, I saw something strange. Her hands were covering her face, but her eyes were peering through her fingers. They weren't panicked. They were watchful, predatory. She looked at me. Then she looked at the gun in William's hand. Then back to me. "He's distracted," her eyes seemed to say. "Get ready." She wasn't begging for her life anymore. She was positioning me. She wanted me to be the weapon that killed her husband. "You're a fraud, William," Martha cried out suddenly, her voice shaking but distinct. She wasn't talking to him. She was performing for me. "You talk about power, but at the beginning, at Blackwood, you were terrified." Sterling froze. The insult pierced his ego instantly. He turned slowly to face her. "What did you say?" "You were scared," Martha taunted, looking up at him, drawing his attention away from me. "You were scared of the inspector. You were scared of Vance, and you were terrified of James." Sterling's face went deadly calm. "James Harris," Martha hissed. "The fourth partner. The man who put up the capital. The man who had a conscience." Sterling walked over to Martha and crouched down, bringing his face inches from hers. "I wasn't scared of James," Sterling whispered. "I was disappointed in him." "He wanted out," Martha said, her voice rising, ensuring I could hear every word. She was pouring gasoline on my history, knowing it would ignite. "He wanted to go to the police. He wanted to return the money. And you panicked." "I did not panic," Sterling roared, standing up and waving the gun. I executed a business decision. James was weak. He was going to ruin everything we built because he felt sorry for a few sick society scum. I froze on the floor. The pain in my ribs vanished, replaced by a cold, hollow dread that spread from my stomach to my fingertips. I pressed my hand against my chest, making sure the recorder was still running. James Osiris, my father. I had grown up thinking he was just an investor who died in a tragic accident. I knew he was involved, but I thought he was a victim of the cover-up. I thought he was collateral damage. He wasn't just an investor, I whispered, the realization choking me. He was a partner. Sterling turned to me, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He was the fourth partner, Taylor, he sneered. James built the company with us, but he didn't have the stomach for the cost of doing business. He was soft. Like you. He paced the room, manic and proud, lost in the glory of his own sins. He called me that night, Sterling said, gesturing with the gun. He said he was going to the press. He said he was going to expose the dumping. He was crying about moral obligations. He laughed darkly. So I drove to his house. I told him we needed to talk. I offered to drive him to the site one last time to make it right. He mimed turning a steering wheel. I tampered with the steering column myself while he was inside getting the files. A loose nut here, a severed line there. Simple mechanics. I watched him drive away. I followed him to the coastal road. I watched his headlights disappear over the edge of the cliff. A scream built in my throat, hot and jagged. He didn't just order it, he did it. He killed my father with his own hands, watched him burn, and then hired me 3 years later. He had let me fetch his coffee. He had let me organize his calendar. He had smiled at me every morning, knowing he was the reason I was an orphan. You killed him, I choked out, tears streaming down my face. You were his friend. I was his superior, Sterling shouted, just like I was superior to that little insect Vance. Vance, Chloe's father. The site inspector, Sterling spat, always sniffing around with his clipboard, asking about soil toxicity. He thought he was a hero. I made sure he ended up as a statistic. A drug overdose in a cheap motel. Easy to stage. No one misses a junkie. He looked at me, his eyes wide and soulless. I cleared the board, Taylor. I removed the weak pieces so the strong could survive. James, Vance, and now, Arthur. He looked down at Arthur, whose breathing had become shallow and raspy. And now, he said, turning the gun toward Martha. The final loose end. William, no! Martha screamed, crawling backward. She looked at me again. Her eyes were desperate, pleading, but there was a sharpness to them, a command. Do it now. She kicked a heavy glass ashtray across the floor toward me. It spun on the Persian rug and slid to a stop inches from my hand. She didn't want to be saved. She wanted me to pick it up. She wanted me to attack him. She was setting the stage for his death. The crazed judge shoots his wife, and the brave secretary defends her by crushing his skull. She would walk away the grieving widow, and I would be her executioner. I looked at the ashtray. It was heavy crystal, a lethal weapon. I looked at William's back as he aimed the gun at his wife. The rage was a physical thing now. It was a roar in my ears that drowned out the engine of the boat. I wanted to do it. I wanted to feel the crystal shatter against his head. I wanted to make him pay for my father, for Chloe's father, for 3 years of humiliation. My fingers curled around the cold glass of the ashtray. I started to rise, my muscles coiled to strike. Say goodbye, Martha, Sterling whispered. Chapter 9. Court is adjourned. I raised the heavy crystal ashtray, my arm trembling with the weight of it, my heart pounding with a murderous rhythm. Do it, a voice in my head screamed, a voice that sounded suspiciously like Martha's, End him. But before I could bring it down, the heavy oak doors of the lounge burst open. It wasn't the police. We hadn't docked yet. The boat was still churning through the open water. It was Dante. Judge Sterling spun around, his eyes wide with surprise. His reaction was instinctive, born of adrenaline and madness. He didn't look to see who it was. He just raised the gun and fired. Bang. Wood splintered from the doorframe inches from Dante's head. Dante threw himself backward into the corridor, pressing himself flat against the wall, just as a second shot tore through the open space where he had been standing. "Get back!" Sterling screamed, his voice cracking. "No one enters my court!" "William, stop!" Dante shouted from the hallway, his voice echoing off the paneled walls. "It's over. The crew has the lounge surrounded. The captain has cut the engines. You have nowhere to go." It was a bluff. I knew it was a bluff. The crew were likely hiding in the galley, terrified. But Sterling didn't care about the odds. He laughed, a wet, rattling sound that bubbled up from his chest. He looked at the smoking gun, then at the door, his eyes dancing with a terrifying light. "Surrender?" he cackled. "To whom? To a magician and a deckhand? I am the chief judge. I do not surrender to the help." He marched toward the door, stepping over Arthur's bleeding body without a downward glance. "You think you can corner me?" Sterling roared, firing another shot blindly into the hallway. "I will kill everyone on this boat if I have to. I will pilot this ship into hell myself." "William!" Martha scrambled up from the floor. She lunged forward, grabbing the hem of his linen jacket. She wasn't fighting him. She was anchoring him. "William, stop, please!" she screamed, her voice raw. Sterling tried to shake her off, keeping the gun trained on the doorway. "Let go, Martha. I have to silence the witness." "No." Martha dragged herself in front of him, putting her body between him and the door. She grabbed his free hand, pressing it to her tear-stained cheek. "Look at me," she begged. "William, look at your wife." Sterling hesitated. The madness in his eyes flickered, momentarily confused by her touch. "They want to take me," he whispered, like a frightened child waking from a nightmare. "They want to take my gavel." "Let them take it," Martha sobbed, her hands gripping his lapels. "Let them arrest you. We can fight this in the appeals. I have the best lawyers in Cairo on speed dial. We can beat this, William." She looked up at him with wide, desperate eyes, the eyes of a woman who would do anything for her husband. It was the greatest performance of her life. "If you surrender now," she promised, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper, "you will go to a minimum security facility, and I will be there, every visiting day. I will wait for you, William. I will wait 10 years, 20 years. We can be together again. Just put the gun down." Sterling looked at her. His hand lowered slightly. The promise of loyalty, even in ruin, was the one thing his ego couldn't resist. You would wait?" "Always," Martha lied. "You are my husband. You are the only man I have ever respected." She turned her head slowly, looking at me where I was frozen near the bar. Her eyes locked onto mine. They were wet with tears, but behind the water, they were hard as diamonds. She needed to seal the deal. She needed to make sure he was the villain, and she was the saint trying to save him. "Taylor," Martha pleaded, reaching a hand out to me. "Please, help me." She turned back to William, stroking his arm, but she spoke to me. "Taylor, I know you are angry. I know you are hurting, but please, tell him you forgive him." My breath hitched. "What?" "Forgive him for your father," Martha cried, the words dripping with twisted sympathy. "I know it was terrible. I know he killed James. But he didn't mean for it to go this far. It was the pressure, Taylor. The business. He's not a monster. He's a man who made a mistake." She looked at me, her expression begging for mercy, but her words were a knife twisting in my gut. She was confirming William's guilt out loud, cementing it, while playing the role of the peacemaker. "Forgive him," she sobbed. "Please, Taylor, look at him. He's sorry. He killed your father, but he loves me. Doesn't that count for something? Can't you find it in your heart to let him live?" The room spun. I looked at William. He was watching me, waiting for my absolution, the gun hanging loosely by his side. And then, he blinked. The fog of madness cleared for a split second, replaced by a sharp, dawn-like realization. He looked at my face, my high cheekbones, my dark eyes. "James," he whispered, "you have his eyes." He stepped back, his gaze darting from me to the door where I had entered moments ago. "The drinking," he muttered, "the fear, the seduction in my chambers." His face turned a violent, mottled purple. "It was a lie," he hissed. "All of it. You didn't come to me because you needed protection. You didn't admire me." "No," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I loathe you." The insult hit him harder than a bullet. His chest heaved. To be hated was one thing, but to be played? To be manipulated by a girl he considered furniture? It shattered the one thing he valued more than his life, his superiority. "You," he choked out. "You played me? You? A little orphan girl? You dared to enter my chambers and mock me." "William, ignore her," Martha cried, sensing the shift. "Just look at me." "Get off!" Sterling roared with the force of a wounded beast. He didn't just push Martha, he threw her. He backhanded her with his free hand, sending her crashing into the coffee table. She hit the wood with a sickening thud and slumped to the floor, groaning. He didn't even look to see if she was alive. His eyes were locked on me. "You want revenge?" he screamed, raising the gun. "You want to avenge your pathetic father?" He marched toward me. I backed up until my spine hit the bar. "I am the master of this board," Sterling bellowed, his ego fully inflamed, burning hot and destructive. "I do not get played by the pawns. I remove them." He stopped 3 feet from me. The barrel of the gun looked like a cannon. "You came here for a reckoning, Taylor." He smiled, and it was the smile of the devil himself. "So let me give it to you." He aimed for my heart. "Court is adjourned," Judge Sterling whispered, his finger tightening on the trigger. Chapter 10. The Final Act. He never finished the squeeze. A deafening crack tore through the lounge. It wasn't the metallic pop of the judge's semi-automatic. It was louder, deeper. The roar of a heavy-caliber revolver. The judge's head snapped back, as if he had been punched by an invisible fist. A mist of red sprayed onto the white wall behind him. His eyes went wide, frozen in a final moment of supreme shock, before his knees buckled. He hit the floor with the heavy, dead weight of a man who was no longer a legend, just a corpse. I gasped, dropping to my knees, shielding my face from the spray. Silence descended on the room. A ringing, deafening silence. I looked toward the doorway. Dante stood there, his arm extended, a large silver revolver smoking in his hand. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't smiling. He looked like a statue carved from Judgement itself. "Case closed," Dante said softly. Then the boat lurched. The engines cut out completely. The Osiris drifted with a gentle thud against the tires of the Edfu dock. We had arrived. For a long minute, no one moved. The lounge was a graveyard. Arthur lay curled in his blood. William lay sprawled on his back, his eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling fan. And Martha. Martha Sterling stood up slowly. She smoothed her white linen skirt. She wiped a speck of blood from her cheek. She looked at her dead husband, then at her dead lover. And then she let out a long, shuddering breath. She didn't look horrified. She looked relieved. "Thank God," she whispered, her voice trembling with a perfectly rehearsed frailty. Thank God you stopped him, Dante. He went mad. He killed Arthur. He was going to kill us all. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. Taylor, are you all right? He hurt you. I stared at her, too stunned to speak. The transformation was instant. The puppet master had vanished. The grieving widow had taken the stage. Police! A voice shouted from the deck, boarding the vessel. In here! Martha cried out, rushing toward the door. Help us, please! A squad of uniformed officers stormed into the lounge, weapons drawn. They weren't the mercenaries William had expected. These were Egyptian National Police, led by a stern-faced captain. Drop the weapon! The captain ordered Dante. Dante placed the revolver on the floor and raised his hands calmly. Self-defense, Captain. He was about to execute the girl. The captain holstered his weapon and surveyed the carnage. He looked at the bodies, then at Martha. Mrs. Sterling? The captain asked. Yes, Martha sobbed, collapsing into a chair. It was my husband. He snapped. He found out about Arthur and me. He killed him. He killed Elena. It was a massacre. She buried her face in her hands. I tried to stop him. She wept. Taylor tried to stop him. Thank heaven for this man. He saved our lives. It was perfect. It was the narrative she wanted. William the villain, Arthur the victim, me the witness, and Dante the hero who saved the widow. The captain walked over to her. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Mrs. Sterling, he said gently, you are safe now. Martha looked up, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. I just want to go home. Of course, the captain said. Then his grip on her shoulder tightened. He reached behind his back with his other hand. Stand up, please, he said, his voice turning steel hard. Excuse me? Martha blinked. Stand up, the captain repeated. He pulled her roughly to her feet. Martha Sterling, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and racketeering. Martha's jaw dropped. What? No, you don't understand. My husband did this. Your husband pulled the trigger, the captain said, spinning her around and slapping metal cuffs onto her wrists. But we know who loaded the gun. This is a mistake, Martha shrieked, struggling. I am a victim. Taylor, tell them. Dante. She looked wildly at Dante. Tell them. You saw it. You're my witness. Dante lowered his hands. He walked over to the bar, picked up a clean napkin, and wiped the gunpowder residue from his fingers. I am a witness, Martha, Dante said, his voice dropping the theatrical lilt. It was flat, American, and terrifyingly authoritative. But not for you. What? Martha froze. Dante turned to face her. You thought you had won, didn't you? It was a beautiful plan. Elegant. Symmetrical. He began to pace around her, dissecting her like a specimen. Step 1. The murder of Marcus Thorne. That didn't go according to plan, did it? Martha went rigid. You put Chloe in that room. You put a gun in the nightstand. You banked on Marcus being aggressive, on him forcing himself on her so she would shoot him in self-defense. A perfect tragedy. Dante shook his head. But Marcus surprised you? He had a soft spot for her. Maybe he just wasn't the monster you needed him to be that night. He didn't attack her, so Chloe didn't shoot. Martha's eyes darted around the room. So you improvised, Dante said coldly. You sent Arthur. You had him climb over the partition from his balcony to Marcus's. Arthur shot him. And then you locked Chloe in there, didn't you? You were planning to stage her suicide. A distraught girl, overcome with guilt after murdering her lover. Another loose end tied up. I felt bile rise in my throat. She was going to kill Chloe. Step 2, Dante continued. Arthur kills Elena. You gaslit her, made her paranoid, then goaded Arthur into silencing her. You watched him push her, and you saved that information to use as leverage. Martha went pale. Step 3. William kills Arthur. You engineered the reveal of the affair perfectly. You pointed William at Arthur like a loaded weapon. Dante stopped in front of her. And finally, Step 4. Taylor kills William. You slid that heavy ashtray to her. You goaded her about her father. You wanted Taylor to bash William's skull in. That way, everyone is dead or guilty. And you? The grieving widow. You inherit the insurance. You inherit the estate. You walk away clean. Martha stared at him. The tears dried up instantly. Her face hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. It would have worked, she hissed. It was perfect. It was, Dante agreed, except for one variable. You, she spat. Who are you? You're just a magician. I hired you to distract them. You hired a distraction, Dante said, but you didn't check who was under the mask. He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a coin or a card. He pulled out a leather badge holder and flipped it open. It wasn't Egyptian. It was Interpol, Financial Crimes Division. Agent Elias Thorne, Dante said. I've been building the RICO case against the Blackwood Syndicate for 5 years. Martha stared at the badge, her mouth opening and closing. I intercepted your communications, Martha, Dante said. I saw the payment to the headhunter for Taylor. I saw the transfer to the club promoter for Chloe. You thought you were hiring pawns to avenge their fathers. You knew you were hiring the daughters of the men you killed. They were tools, Martha screamed, her composure shattering. They were little pawns. I gave them a purpose. You gave them a suicide mission, Dante corrected. I won, Martha yelled, struggling against the captain's grip. William is dead. Arthur is dead. I won. You lost the moment you hired me, Dante said softly. Take her away. As the police dragged Martha away, screaming obscenities, the door to the lounge opened one last time. Chloe, Sarah, stepped inside. She was pale, holding the flash drive tightly in her hand, but her chin was high. She looked at the bodies, then at me. I ran to her. We collided in a hug that knocked the wind out of me. We held each other, shaking, crying, alive. It's over, I whispered into her hair. Sarah, it's over. She pulled back and looked at Dante. Then she walked over to him and held out the silver flash drive. Here, she said, the soil samples, the bank transfers, the emails proving they knew the land was toxic. Dante took the drive. He held it like it was made of gold. This is enough, Dante said. This puts Martha away for life. And the assets, the villas, the boats, the accounts. He looked at us. We will seize it all. Every penny. It will be liquidated and put into a trust for the families of the Blackwood victims. I looked at the drive. My father's legacy. Vance's legacy. They didn't die for nothing, I whispered. Dante nodded. He put a hand on my shoulder, then on Sarah's. No, he said. They died so you could finish the job. He turned to the police officer. Let's go home.